That's right, you're watching Africa Trade and Business. I'm Bronwyn Seaborn. In this episode, we focus on Africa's energy transition, whether the continent is making progress on that front, and what kind of investment appetite we're seeing for green energy projects. We'll be getting into that with Shirley Webber, coverage head for resources and energy at Absa CIB. But first, your news making headlines across the continent. Eni is looking to Africa for growth. The Italian firm is investing in farming in several countries on the continent. That's as it aims to produce around 1/5 of the agricultural feedstock it will need for its biofuels business by 2025. Energy companies are betting on increasing demand for fuels made from vegetable oil, waste cooking oil and grease, which they say will play a key role in decarbonising the truck, aviation and shipping sectors in the coming years. To satisfy this expected demand, Eni is ramping up its biorefining capacity and at the same time is expanding farming ventures to secure supplies and reduce the risk of excessive volatility in the commodity market. Eni has signed deals with several countries it's identified where there is degraded land where farmers cultivate crops that do not compete with the food supply chain. Around 700,000 farmers are expected to be involved in Eni's farming activities by 2026, under deals signed with countries such as Angola, Benin and Kenya. The European Union is in negotiations with the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's as it looks to shore up its supplies of critical raw materials. The DRC is a leading source of battery minerals. The EU expects to launch negotiations with other African nations in this regard and has set its sights on Rwanda, Uganda and Zambia. Kenya's inflation rate unexpectedly climbed in May to 8%. The acceleration was fueled by soaring sugar prices. The cost of sugar surged 49% in May because of tight global supplies and low domestic cane deliveries as growers switched to producing other crops, including corn. The latest reading puts inflation further outside of the central bank's target range of 2.5% to 7.5%. But incoming Governor Kamu Tuge says he expects inflation to be within that range by July. Well, countries all over the world are looking for ways to go green, with the focus being on the energy transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energy. In Africa specifically, this shift has been brought into sharp focus, particularly as nations have to find ways to shift away from using their traditional natural resources, such as coal, at a time when many countries are facing energy shortages. So joining me to unpack all of that is Shirley Webber, who is the coverage head for resources and energy at Absa CIB. Shirley, thanks so much for joining us. So let's start on home ground. Let's start with South Africa. We're in the midst of an energy crisis, with many people saying some of the solutions should surely lie in green energy. And let's delve in there and REAP specifically. That program has rolled out over 100 energy projects. Is that a success story in your books?
No, thanks for having me. I think the reprogram of our government is indeed a success story. I do believe there were initially some transition issues in getting it up and running, but I think we're actually on track now. The Integrated Resource Plan of government that was announced in 2019 clearly gave the message that we should put about 29 gigawatts of new energy into the system. And if you look at all the bids now, from bid 1 to about bid 6, there's about 10 gigawatts that is in the system. The last round 5, a bit of a struggling, to get some of the programs up and running, but I believe it is successful. And together with the existing energy transition initiatives, like gas to power, etc., I believe it will be a success as well.
Put it into context for us. How do we stack up against other African peers, perhaps?
If we compare, and I'll give a few examples, if you look at, for example, Egypt, their growth rate, for example, is estimated at about 2.3% for 2023. Ours are obviously a bit smaller than that. And they also have a national energy supplier, which is obviously the Egypt Energy Eskom equivalent of hours, and they're also the main supplier and running of programs. What we've seen there, however, is that they are also planning another 18 gigawatts of power by 2032, and in a very similar line, us building out as well. There's one big difference between us and Egypt, for example, and that is really the investors coming into those markets, because clearly the Middle East, like the UAE, Saudi, Qatar, is supporting Egypt as well. And that's what South Africa should be doing, is getting more investors into these renewable programs.
So as we look to get more investors here in South Africa, 100 projects at the moment under REAP, where do you see that number going? Is there going to be exponential growth, or how do you see that playing out?
I think it's very important for around 5 to be looked at. You know, around 6 is in progress. There's definitely talk of around 7 happening. And if you look at the other initiatives like the gas to power, as well as the battery storage, which is very new for Africa, I believe it won't necessarily be exponential. It will be phased in coming through the system. But it is all positive. It's not just wind and solar anymore. There's other initiatives coming through.
What are some of the challenges that these projects face? You did highlight slightly there on round 5 that it's a little bit slow, progress is slow. What are some of the challenges that are preventing these projects perhaps from coming online?
I think the willingness for generation is definitely there. I think there's a problem with distribution and transmission. That for us, our infrastructure must definitely be built out. We've seen, for example, with battery storage, that it's focused on Northern Cape specifically, especially because of the grid capacity issues that we are experiencing. So I would believe that those are the more prominent issues.
Those are the more prominent issues, but they also represent a lot of opportunity for where investors could potentially get involved. What is the kind of appetite that we're seeing at the moment? You highlight how successful Egypt could be because of the support they're getting. Here in South Africa, what is investor appetite like for these kinds of projects?
I think the investor appetite is growing. The fact that our DMRE opened up, for example, for captive power, for many mining projects, where power plants are being set up next to the mines, etc., even if it's before or after the meter, that is helping tremendously. And we've seen many IPPs coming in wanting to do those as well. So that investing in that is a very big opportunity.
So we've chatted about Egypt, we've chatted about South Africa in depth. I know Absa also has their eye on Tanzania as an interesting case. Walk us through some of the potential that you're seeing there and what that potential could do for the economy, because sometimes these investments or even adding this capacity to the grid is really kind of, I want to say, life-changing for the economies of these countries, right?
Definitely. I think Tanzania is just one example of how things could expand. They've got a lot of natural gas as well, and gas to power is already happening in their environment. And it will grow because it's producing fields. What we also see in Tanzania is they've got a lot of battery minerals, and we must never forget that graphite, lithium, cobalt, all of those commodities is definitely needed for the renewable space. So although it's seen as an input into the renewable space, and not necessarily the generating of it, we mustn't forget about Africa. The resources are abundant, for those categories, and our African countries definitely need to use that.
And it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Africa is so rich in these resources that are going to be needed for the green energy transition, but we need the power in order to mine them, right?
No, that's very true. That's why the just transition is so important, and as a banking group, Absa would like to enable these environments, to definitely help the resources companies, support them, and help build the renewable space.
And that's why I have to ask, is there enough resources and expertise to support this energy transition in Africa?
I think there's definitely, the resources are there. I think financing capabilities as well as willingness is definitely there. Our African continent must just make sure that the regulatory aspects are proper, you know, that people are willing to invest and that monetary and fiscal policies are clear. And that will enable investment coming through the African countries.
Well, we really do hope that we can see that come through, and that the narrative of Africa Rising really is true in this case, because there's certainly a lot of opportunity. But Shirley, we have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for your time. Shirley Webber is Coverage Head for Resources and Energy at Absa CIB. And that's where we leave things for this week's episode of Africa Trade and Business. From me, Bronwyn Seaborn, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now.